In this video, we're breaking the greatest of all the design commandments by using 3 fonts strictly forbidden in the design world. But we're throwing caution to the wind and using all of them to create unique packaging designs for America's first soda, root beer. At the end, I'll be posting my final designs to Reddit, a place famous for its friendliness and helpful critiques. Will the entire design community burn me at the stake, or will Papyrus become 2023's newest design trend? Let's find out. Well, we've got our root beer can here, along with the first star of the show. Now, without question, this is the most hated font in the entire world. But when people literally use it on their tombstones, you can kind of start to see why. Now, I'm going to keep my design very playful, so I think the font should fit right in. My first thought, though, is that pretty much every big root beer brand is just obsessed with wooden barrels, even though root beer isn't even made in barrels. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, this might seem a little crazy, but my idea here is to turn this thing into a rocket ship. I just need a nose cone, like so, a couple fins, and a little bitty window. And now we are ready for takeoff. Now, don't worry, I know this looks like... I'm really just using it for a base, because the idea here is to turn this into a comic book style illustration. Of course, our rocket needs a little flame, but instead of fire, why don't we make it root beer? Kind of like it's shooting out all that fizzy soda it's got inside. Now we can scooch all that up a bit so that the root beer covers more of the bottom of the can, which seems like a perfect spot to place our text. Now, I would really love to call this rocket root beer because of the rocket, but one of the legit problems Comic Sans does have is that it's super thin. So when you zoom out, I mean, that's just bad. So we need a shorter name, maybe something like Blast, because the rocket's blasting away. Either way, we can pick fonts for these down here that match our Comic Sans title later on, but for now, let's turn this heaping pile of garbage into something a little more presentable. So I'll just whip out the iPad and use this image base to sketch out a general structure. After the rough sketch is done, I outline everything with an ink brush, keeping all my lines nice and crisp. Lastly, I added in some darker shadows to build contrast. Now we can say goodbye to our old friend and hello to the new one. Now we don't want to just grab the paint bucket tool and... because that just looks horrible. Plus, if we try to paint any shadows over that, it just ruins our entire stroke. So instead, we want to make a separate layer, select the area we want to paint with the magic wand tool, and then expand that selection by a few pixels. That way our selection goes inside of the stroke, but not all the way past it. Then we can just fill that in, and we get nice, clean edges. Then we'll make the rest of the barrel brown, maybe red for the metal, blue for the window, and of course, brown and tan for the root beer. Then I just started painting in some shadows to add a bit more depth to the illustration, which was made much easier because I put each piece of the ship in its own layer. So I could just add a layer mask and paint solely on that piece without worrying about it spilling over to the other ones. Now maybe just a few shines on here. And I think that actually looks pretty good. Now for the background, I think I'll go with red. But that does make some of the ship blend in a little too much. So I'll darken up the top and add some yellow at the bottom. It better help separate that ship from the background. I think it might be cool to add in a bit of a starburst here too, just to make things feel more lively. Then we can just fade that off at the top. And I've got these little halftone dots here, which I think might be really cool to place right behind the ship to really help us develop that comic look. And now, my friends, I think we have finally reached the time where we're going to try to make this Comic Sans look halfway decent. First things first, Comic Sans actually does have a bold version, so we use that to beef it up a bit. And then we can make that yellow to stand out against the root beer. Of course, we'll probably want to add in a stroke so it matches everything else. And I do want to scoot these letters around some so we can make things feel a bit more lively and less stiff. Oh, and now maybe we can give this another drop shadow to give it a bit of a 3D effect. And then just like the rocket, I'm going to add in a little bit of shine here. But to make these feel super bubbly, I'm going to do something special with the shadows. If you have a ball and you add a light to it, you're going to get shading on one side of it. And of course that ball will cast a shadow, but the ground will also bounce slide back onto the underside of the ball, creating what we call bounce light. So I'm going to mimic this effect on our letters by painting in the areas that would be darker, but leaving a lighter portion right around the rim. And we can just fade off these edges a bit, scooch down the opacity, then a subtle gradient to top it all off. Then we'll give that root beer text a more bubbly font, and make that the same color as the foam up here. Now a small stroke, a drop shadow, then something out of the way for the fluid amount. Now I'd actually kind of like this entire thing to have more of a realistic halftone texture, kind of like real comic books do, to where the darker areas of the image have larger dots, and the lighter areas have smaller dots. Thankfully, I found this really cool tutorial from Texture Labs, which shows me how to do that. To get the best results though, I did go over my image with a bit of gradient shading, that way I'd have some nice color transitions, and it's a super easy process. All I need to do is turn this black and white, and then just add this little texture over everything, which is basically just a bunch of small diamonds. But when you change the blending mode to hard mix, it gives you the perfect effect. In all the dark areas, you have really large circles, and in the light areas, you have really tiny ones. Now just give this whole thing a gradient map, so we turn the black into red, just the blending mode, and of course we can mask out any of these areas we don't want the effect to be so strong. And I'm gonna add in a little stippling texture that can just go over top of everything and make the entire image feel nice and consistent. And I'm thinking we could put a grunge texture over everything as well. That just gives us a nice, almost paper-like texture. Now, I don't know exactly how it'll look, but one thing I want to try is to give this a bit of chromatic aberration. illustration, which is actually pretty easy. We just need to make a duplicate of our ship illustration, turn off its red channel, and if we slowly move that image to the right, to start to see we get these split color tones, which is actually something you'd see in older comic books just because of the printing process. And honestly, I think it actually looks pretty cool. The last thing I want to do is just to add a little extra lighting to the ship so it helps match our Comic Sans text. Okay, I lied. I want to do one last thing, which is just to add just a little extra color to this root beer so it looks more stirred up and lively, and maybe even add a few bubbles in here. And that wraps up the Comic Sans root beer brand. So the first slot for my Reddit post is complete. Now we move on to this really cool bottle, which we're going to completely destroy with Papyrus, a font famously used for the logo of one of the largest movies of all time. Honestly though, this is the one I'm most worried about, mainly because the only thing I can really think of where this font might fit in would be on top of some old paper. Now I don't know about you, but this immediately makes me think of a treasure map. And it is true, I've already done a video over making a pirate themed website, which turned out pretty good by the way if you want to check it out. But pirates binge drinking barrels of root beer just seems to make so much sense. I think I'm gonna go for it. After doing my due diligence and consulting the pirates' terms and phrases, I have discovered the word Sea Dog, which just seems like a perfect name for a root beer. And now to bring Captain Sea Dog to life, we're gonna start out with a skull, but he does look a little too happy right now, so I'm gonna use a liquify filter to give him some attitude. In the end though, I do want this entire design to look like ink drawn on paper, so just like we did for the last design, I'm just gonna use images to form some type of base, which I can use to create that final illustration from. I'm gonna give him a bandana to help him hide his embarrassing hair loss. We'll just form that around the head. Maybe even flip it this way too. And of course, all the coolest pirates have giant earrings. Now I like to break up our text here. That way we can stick our pirate right in the center of the label. But you know, I do think we need something to anchor this text to the rest of the illustration. And I think some paper banners would do just the trick. We can kind of layer it up on itself and create some folds so we get a bit of extra depth. And of course, we'll have one too down here at the bottom for the root beer text. I'll just scooch these around so they take up a little more space. Of course, we're gonna take our text and bend it so it matches the shape of each of the banners. But first, I'd like to go ahead and take this and make our ink illustration from it. As always, I'll start with a rough sketch to get the forms right. I want the bandana to feel more rugged and torn, like Sea Dog has lived a rough life. I'm also making his face structure a bit sharper to help him feel more intimidating. Now these banners need some major help, but with a better structure and flow, wrapping around the head, they really do help tie the entire drawing together. For the final inking, I'm going to be using a textured brush instead of a smooth one. And I'll just start by outlining everything and adding in some finer wear and tear around the edges. We don't want anything smooth here, we want it to have some grit. Then we can get to the shading. I'm going for a nice variety of darker areas that contrast with lighter areas. And this is especially true around the skull, so we can bring a lot of focus to the eyes. For this, I'm using a charcoal brush, which also adds in a lot of additional texture. Once that's done, I'll go in and do a little cross hatching and add in a few smaller details along the face and the badges. And now with our new illustration in here, we can move on to the text. And all I need to do here is draw a path that matches the shape of the badge. And then I can type onto that path and the letters will bend around it. Just center that up and we'll get the root beer in too. Our text does seem a little thin right now compared to the rest of the illustration, so I'm just gonna give it a 1 pixel stroke to help bolden it up. I'm gonna stick in some extra texture for our paper to help it feel more worn. Then we can darken up the ink and turn it slightly brown. Now to help fill in some of this extra space we've got on the sides, I'm thinking we make this background look like a map. So I just quickly drew these land pieces, which are designed to form a nice shape around his face. And then some extra details like a path to a treasure, and then a few little waves to help show this is an ocean. I'm gonna fill in the land with some color to help it stand out. And maybe even a slight shadow coming off of these would look cool. And we can add a little browning on our main illustration too to help match the maps. And maybe some extra color on our bandana here, just so we can develop some contrast between all these different pieces. Then I'm just gonna take a charcoal brush and paint over this ink to give it a little bit of a distressed look, like it's been worn away over the years. Oh, and I bet this label would look really cool if we roughened up these edges. I have actually seen this technique used before on other products, even though I'm pretty sure it's probably expensive to print. But we don't care about price around here anyways. Maybe we'll even stick in some shadows to make it look like the paper is peeling over. And since the volume amount is already on the bottle, we don't have to put it on the label. Well, I tried my very hardest with Papyrus, but I imagine the hate will still be strong for this one. And now there is Impact, the font of choice for meme lords all across the universe. We do have another can here, but I want to completely switch it up and go dark mode. And when I think of root beers, sometimes I think of Texas. And when I think of Texas, it makes me think of, yes, I am going to put a cow on the can. Why? Well, I really just want to see if I can make it work. Ideally, it would be something fierce, something with attitude, something with, oh my Lord. Look at this. Look at! I mean, this truly is the ultimate beast, and also my new mascot. Oh, and I just thought of the perfect name, Longhorn. And I know this isn't a real longhorn, but its horns are long enough, so shh. This guy does have a nice underglow to him, kind of like he was near a fire. Now you might be asking, what kind of root beer has fire on the can? Well, Longhorn is built for the tough, the rugged, the macho man that likes fire in his belly.
They taste like burning.
Now logically, that fire is going to spread up to our letters, especially if they're made of paper. So let's grab some burn marks and place that right in there. Get rid of the white parts with the blend if, and then mask out this part. Now it kind of just looks like somebody took a bite out of our O. So what we really need is some type of flame. Setting that blending mode to add, we'll get rid of all the black parts. Then we can just warp it around to fit the shape of our burn. And that looks pretty convincing. Now I probably don't want to catch all the letters on fire, but adding a little char here and there I think would go a long way. And while I'm here, I think I'll just add in some shadows cast by these horns. And just a touch of blur to soften up the edges. Now I could understand how some people might mistake this for some strange cow steroid, so we probably need to tell people that it's root beer. And it might not even hurt to show some type of soda on there as well. Luckily I found this little guy, and I think if we nestle that right here at the bottom of the can, remove the background, flatten it out a bit, adjust the levels because it's a little too bright right now, and then make that foam more tan. Oh, and I think it would be really cool if we adjusted the color of the root beer to make it look like it's floating inside of the liquid. Maybe just a little texture on that too. And then we can scooch this fire up to make it look like it's coming off of the root beer. Now I like a disembodied bullhead as much as the next guy, but I think we might need to borrow the body off another cow. Thank you for your sacrifice, my friend. We're gonna make our trusty steed here a bit of a chunker. From here, I faded off the body to blend it into the darker background, and then gave the head some extra lighting to better tie it in with the fire. I thought adding some smoke would be a nice touch, I just had to be careful not to overdo it. The fire then received a bump in intensity, and I added a small drop shadow from the bull's neck. I feel like this is definitely a brand that needs one of those established states. The last thing we need to put in is our can size information, but I really don't want to put it down here and run our nice centered layout. But it does look like we might be able to squeeze it right up here. And we'll just need to add something over here on the right side to help balance it out. I have actually seen a lot of brands advertise that their root beer has no caffeine, but man, this thing looks like it'd have extra. And the third and final design is done. Our collection is now complete, so I set off to post on every design subreddit I knew of. And several hours later, the results were in. They're all very professional looking, and each gives off a unique feeling. The only concrete change for me personally would be to maybe change Seethed font. It's a bit too close to Papyrus for comfort for me. And the person underneath them commented, "It is Papyrus." That is correct. I like the blast, but might need more promotional materials in a booth at the street fair to try some. Well, he's gonna be hard to win over, isn't he? In this post, I asked if anybody would like to try the root beers. Not with Papyrus font, I wouldn't. No way. Did you make Comic Sans look good? Is that Comic Sans? The blast one doesn't really do anything for me. If I'm thinking of a comic book, I'd imagine it'd be something more like this. Well, I guess we didn't quite reach those standards. The first one's not bad, I feel. Papyrus looks like a kid's first PowerPoint presentation. Well, that's a bit of a kick to the soul. Are you required to use these pre-installed fonts for a school project or something? If not, I would definitely branch out. But if these are all you're allowed to use, number 1 and number 3 are brilliant. I don't know whether to be offended because they think I'm still a student, or if I should just be happy that they liked it. I guess I'll just be happy. So Comic Sans, Papyrus, and Impact. Not sure if troll. A little bit of a troll. They look pretty generic because they're using recognizable typefaces without significant modification. Gee, thanks. Seethed lacks clarity and is overwhelmed by the overall composition. Longhorn works, but it's missing out on a typeface with more character. I mean, I don't know. I thought it had enough character. Designs are fine, but you need to look for alternatives to Papyrus and Comic Sans. They've been overused for decades, plus Comic Sans is so poorly designed. You do have alternatives besides the fonts built into your computer. Well, I guess there is still always something out there for all of us to learn.